Hello and welcome back, everyone. It's Puppet Time Online. I'm your host, Eric Wright, and this is the opportunity for you to sit down with me and some of puppetry's finest to hear about what they know about. I'm happy to be back. We were off last week to make some room for important conversations on Instagram. There's really a lot more important things than me talking about puppetry going on right now, and you should absolutely be listening to those and boosting those conversations. But it's also important to take a break sometimes, and so that's why Puppet Time Online is here, so that you can refresh and recharge and then go back to the good work that you're doing. So I'm really excited about today's episode. As usual, we've got Katie Denny over here, just off camera here, manning your questions. So if you have questions for me or my guest or anything about puppets or whatever, type them down below and Katie will catch them and she'll make sure that we answer them for you. Yay. I'm really excited to have one of my dearest friends on the show today, a puppeteer by the name of Lake Simons. She is an incredible artist, a wonderful director, just an all-around great person. And so I'm going to start bringing her onto the show right now. This technology is just the weirdest.
And I'm really good at it.
So Lake, you and I have been working together and friends for a pretty long time. Like really since I graduated from Sarah Lawrence and started working with Dan Herlin on Hiroshima Maiden. You joined the cast of that when we started building that show, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you were known as Young Eric.
So many years ago. That was back in 2003.
That's so long ago.
Which seems like so long ago, especially when these days when a week seems like 100 days. So that's incredible. So I always like to start with how people got into puppetry. Can you tell me and our viewers here just a little bit about what got you into, like, your background and what got you into puppetry specifically?
Yeah, sure. I'll try not to go on for too long. You can cut me off, but
okay.
Because there's been a lot of influences. I first of all, I come from a theater family. And so I grew up in theater, and the theater that was being made around me often included puppetry. And so I was aware of puppetry within theater from a very early age.
And this is your parents' theater, the Hip Pocket Theater?
Yeah,
in Texas?
Yep, in Texas, in hot Texas. Outdoor rustic theater, no AC. Nice. Lots of fire ants, but also beautiful, beautiful starry skies. So worth the fire ants. But yeah, so I grew up with all of that around me. And but at that time, I was a kid and I just thought it was cool. And it wasn't until I went to college, or this is sort of my after college situation. After I graduated from North Carolina School of the Arts, I decided to go to Paris, and I studied. I went to École Jacques Lecoq for 2 years, and there was a moment within that that training that it made complete and total sense for me to start making puppets. So that was when I really first started to make my own puppets and realized that I could and wanted to put puppetry into the work that I was making, and saw it as a really exciting way to actually bring together a couple of different worlds that I had been involved in, design and theater and physical theater and other. And just,
And
seeing it as
L'école Jacques Lecoq is a physical theater and movement, and it's not a puppetry school.
It's not a puppetry school. It's often called a clown school because that sounds fun. But there's a lot of other cool stuff that they did there. But there's a particular style of theater there's a lot of different styles and techniques that they teach there, but one is Buffon. And within Buffon, there is a part. The main thing that we do with that is you disguise your body. You create an other part of your body. And so it was through that work that I realized that I needed to detach something from my body. Ooh, that's weird. But it was about creating, I know. Then I took my leg off. No. No, I was excited about this idea of like these little organisms that were living around, like thinking about like a tree that's alive and it just exists in this beautiful way, but then there's all these other little organisms that exist. And so that was sort of like my taking off point with that. And then I moved to New York and had this incredible opportunity to suddenly work with Basil Twist and be a part of his incredible Petrushka project. Just got thrown in and pretended that I knew what I was doing.
How did that all happen? How did you meet Basil?
I was in the right place at the right time. I was hanging out over at Here Theater, the wonderful, fantastic Here Theater, that is such a great promoter of puppetry and supporter of puppetry. And so anyway, I was sitting in their little cafe at the time, and Barbara's partner, Barbara, saw me and said, "You're a puppeteer. We need another puppeteer." And called Basil, and Basil zoomed over on his rollerblades and sat down. And we just had like a funny little awkward conversation, and had Christopher Williams as a common amazing friend. And he just said, "Okay, so come to rehearsal." And I was like, "Oh my God, okay." And
that show,
that was amazing.
That's incredible. I mean, that show went on to tour a lot. I remember seeing that show when I was at Sarah Lawrence, and it being pretty amazing, pretty influential, really.
Yeah.
And then later got to be a part of it. But that show toured around quite a bit, didn't it?
It did, yeah. We went to a lot of places. I can't even remember where we went, but I mean, it was all in the U.S. But it was a very thrilling time. We were all really young and just so thrilled to be on this adventure. And the cast was full of amazing puppetry artists, and it was just a really exciting time. And that was where I met a lot of people that I collaborated with for years and still continue to collaborate with today.
Yeah. And it was, I think, through the Petrushka connections that you met Dan Herlin and got connected to Hiroshima Maiden. Is that right?
It's not actually the way.
Oh, it's not?
No. So I missed out on meeting Dan earlier than I did. My sister met Dan at a theater festival that they were both performing in. And he said, "Oh, tell your sister to contact me." And I did that ridiculous thing where I didn't, because I was just so nervous and thought, I can't just make a cold call to this amazing guy. And let that be a lesson to you. Don't be shy. Always make that call. We want to hear from you. I want you to call me or email me. But anyway, I later, like, he came, I mean, it was definitely like later through Basil, maybe through Christopher too, but he came and saw some work that I had made that you were in later, also Eric, What's Inside the Egg.
Yeah, I remember.
And yeah, we somehow just sort of started to get connected, and then that was another incredible moment for me to be invited into that show with a couple of crossover puppeteers with Basil's work, but also some other people that I'd never worked with. And you know, along with those two incredible puppetry artists, they work with amazing designers. And so,
Right.
you know, incredible lighting designers, and there's very special opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was
And
just
funny
thinking about
memories.
I know, I was just thinking about what's inside the egg too. Just in terms of like all the things that we've worked together on. And that was a show at the here. Oh yeah, Katie found a photo of it. This
Oh.
lovely.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a photograph by
That's a
the
good.
incredible Michael Bodycomb.
Nice.
Awesome picture, yeah.
And this is a piece that
I'm
you
really
put
old
together. Yeah, you somehow have that amazing quality of aging backwards in your pieces. So that was a piece you put on through was that through the harp residency, or was that just a production that you put together at here?
Oh gosh.
Because you were also a harp artist, right?
I was a harp artist. I'm lost track of the project that was for. That might have been for Alice in Wonderland, which you also were a part of.
Right.
But I think that maybe What's Inside the Egg was a harp thing, like the very beginnings of it.
Yeah.
Kind of before it became sort of more and more official, as you know, and sort of fine-tuned as it is today. It was a little bit more of an open kind of a situation. But yeah, that was a long time ago, and it was my first time to collaborate with John Dyer.
Who would later become quite. There would be many collaborations with John Dyer, including your daughter.
True.
True.
I was watching. I actually watched What's Inside the Egg the other day. Not the version that you were in. That is somewhere. I'm hoping that Here Theater has that in their archive somewhere. But I have a version of it was something that I had on a beta tape that then got transferred to VHS, that then got transferred to DVD.
That's
and it was
impressive.
A really bad transfer to DVD. And so,
sure.
But I tried to watch it because Kristen Marting of Here is interested in sharing it on Facebook thing that they're doing. And I watched it, and I don't know. I mean, it's just hard to show live work. It's also hard to show live work on that, you know, because the timing is weird. Difficult. To be in like a moment of like stillness and quiet, like not when you're in the room when that's happening is hard to kind of get as an audience member when you're just like watching it on a computer.
So now you as a artist, you've been a part of a lot of different residencies. We mentioned the harp program, which is the Here Arts Residency program, which is still has still been a residency for a long time. So you've presented a lot of your own original work. And one of the things that I really like about you and your work is that it seems to really reflect your style. Like you seem to really have a style that's your own, and that it distinguishes itself from, from other people's work. How have you practiced, or like how have you found techniques to talk about your own work? Because you have to talk about your work so much to apply for these residencies and to like get other people on board. And when your work doesn't really look like anything that people have seen, that can be a real challenge.
It's extremely challenging, and it continues to be a challenge. One of my John Dyer, as we've now referred to as, he's the father of, we have a daughter together, and we make work together. But he's also went to a really good high school and learned how to write. I did not go to, I went to an okay high school, but I wasn't interested. But he's great with helping me edit. And he's like, he'll take a sentence. He's like, what does this mean? What do you mean by this? I'm like, what do you mean? What do I mean? Doesn't it make sense? But and over the years, I've kind of learned how to like not assume I think the big thing with all of that is like, don't assume someone knows what you're talking about. You know, I'm always a little afraid that I'm going to talk down to someone, but it's really important, of course, to like try your very best to dig into it and try to figure out. And I, whenever I am applying for anything like that, or whether it's a grant or whether it's, you know, a program, you don't really quite know what your piece is yet. You know what like the little morsels of it are. You might have some images involved. And so I find those moments also really helpful because it actually kind of gets you to another level of maybe understanding your piece even a little bit more than you did before. But I do find it really hard to explain my work. I mean, you know, it's the word imaginative is an easy one to use for it. I really believe in the sort of idea of make-believe of a child. I mean, it's, you know, that's kind of like somewhat typical puppetry stuff where it's like we're you know, we are playing with things when we are using puppetry. But of course, not all puppetry is necessarily meant to be funny or lighthearted or, you know, kind of in that silly, like a little silly. But I think that like even when you have that approach with something that's a little more serious, there's still a way that it kind of opens the door for someone to go into it with you. The other thing that I like to do is to not dictate too much. I like to allow for an image or a moment to have enough holes in it to allow for interpretation. Because I also don't necessarily, you know, at various times in my life, I felt like I must start to learn how to tell a story that makes sense. But there's a time when I kind of realized that maybe isn't what I do. I don't think that I necessarily am supposed to be, you know, if that doesn't come naturally to me, I don't want to like leave people in the dark and have them be completely confused and clueless about what they're watching. But I also feel like it can be a nonlinear situation. You know, I think that there's some similarities of like in the dance world of sometimes of what I do. You know, dance is another, and also I'll say a lot of the times I do things that are nonverbal. And so there's no words to really string the story along. And so, and, you know, the dance world kind of has that same thing where there's no words and you're just watching and going off of movement. You're going off of a gesture. You're going off of a relationship that might be forming between 2, 3 or more people, or someone alone having a relationship. I'm also really keen on like relationship between performer and object. You know, and telling that story and believing that an object has a life, you know, has a history, has a story to tell, has a lot attached to it that can be really poetic.
I feel like I asked this question of my friend Spencer Lott, who also recently had a daughter and whose work is also very playful and works with puppets. How has having an actual child in your life, how does that reflect on your interpretation of work that you're like, oh, this is a very childlike experience. Now you have a much closer experience with someone who is a person that is that age and experiencing life in that way. Has it impacted how you view your work or how you think about work that you want to make?
Yes. I mean, all of the above. I mean, it is all of that. It has impacted me in a huge way. She's a constant reminder of how one can encounter life. Of just having this sort of, she picks up everything in here. I have moments when she picks something up and I'm like, no, that's fragile. Oh, that's a toy. That's right. You're supposed to play. I have been holding onto that for years as like this like sacred object, but actually that is a toy and it is to be played with. And you can break it if you want. I don't care. You know, those are like, that's been kind of a good like letting go kind of a thing. And I mean, I don't know if this is true or not, but I like to say that I've been collecting things for years for this moment in my life.
Right.
So that, you know, there's the purpose of, I mean, I know a lot of theater people and like, especially puppetry people that collect all kinds of little objects because you never know when you might need to use it for a show.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
I know, right? Right. But you know, the kind of work that I have mostly made has been very family friendly, but not on purpose. I mean, of course it's on purpose because I'm making it and that's what I'm making. But in terms of it being like me saying, I'm going to make a family show or I'm going to make a kid show, I've never, that's not really ever been my way of thinking. But most of everything that I have made has been in that realm. And I think that that's where that sort of whole make-believe thing is that comes from, and the playful thing and the childlike, approaching something as a child might approach it. And I've, having her, especially right now in this crazy time of us all spending so much time at home and not being able to perform live, or having a hard time even, creating in our spaces. I've had a hard time creating, even though it's like, well, I should be doing that all day long, but it's really hard. I mean, that's also hard with a 4-year-old. But I've been thinking a lot about like, well, she's my audience right now, and that's inspiring, and I have been thinking a lot more about, what would it be like to create something for, specifically with her age group in mind. And even having her perform, I mean, she is already showing signs of wanting to be on stage. And, I mean, as you know, when we've done Carnival the Animals for however long we did that, she bowed on that stage every year. For the first year I was pregnant and she bowed with me. Second year, she was just like in a funny little, thingy, and I bowed with her. And then the other time she's just like, no, I must, and like can't.
She was ready.
She's ready.
She's really grown up in that show. Yeah. This is just, also we found this image for Carnival the Animals, which I just love. Yeah. And you can see, I just want to point out that this swan here is made out of a big piece of rope for the neck and head, and 2 spatulas for the feet, and then some tutus, some fans, and some mirrors, which I feel like found a lot of and a lot of puppeteer focus, a lot of audience attention. But I feel like that kind of homemade aesthetic is pretty common in your work and really shines in your work, and has an accessibility to it that I think is really great to see on stage. And I think, so Carnival of the Animals, for those of watching that don't know much about it, is an orchestral piece by Saint-Saëns, and is intended for children. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's intended for children. Pretty sure.
And I feel like a lot of times it stands in stark contrast to works that would be made explicitly for kids nowadays, that have a lot of screens and a lot of quick moments to keep attention, to keep and hold attention. And this piece really stands out in stark contrast to me in terms of having a lot of quiet moments and a lot of opportunity to try to draw kids forward rather than to try and show them something new at each moment. And I wanted to know sort of how did you address that in that piece and sort of take that into consideration, because it seems to shine really strong in how the piece was constructed.
Well, thank you for those compliments. Those are really good questions. I think that I have to give kudos to the amazing Brenna St. George Jones, who was, when I was hired to do that piece, to create that piece with Miller Theater, she was my cheerleader. She worked there and she was like, we got to get Lake. And it was and a little side note, it was a really big deal for me because I was pregnant, and that's like a huge thing as an artist to be like, I'm pregnant now, nobody's going to hire me. Do I want to even do this anymore? Like, what's it like to be in theater as a mother and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's like a whole other massive conversation that we won't go into now, except for that. But anyway, she I knew she was always an artist, but through that project, she had such a vision. And she basically, we started to ping pong off of each other with ideas. And she was very excited about this sort of like toy theater kind of look of the piece, but of course in a gigantic
on a large
theater.
scale.
Yeah, and so playing around with like flat pieces of scenery, flat like curtains that are painted to look as though they have some fullness to them, but they're actually flat. And he just sort of started to come up with this this cool world. And I presented this idea of it being, because it was for children, of wanting it to be that it was made out of materials that were things that the kids recognized as those things, but then putting them all together in a way that make them become an animal. So, you know, like the elephant is an umbrella and some buckets and a funny little hose. You know, the lion is made up of mops. You know, and really hoping that the kids could identify them. You know, I didn't want to disguise these things so much that they wouldn't be able to see that, like, oh, that's a broom. Hey, you know, and so I think that, like, we just kind of went from there, and really allowing the music. I mean, when I work with music, I really allow the music to you know, even though I work with John all the time, who makes all of the live music for our shows, we often work at the same time. And so the music sort of starts to show up as the piece shows up, you know, as we are rehearsing.
There we go.
I have to plug in my phone. I've got low power mode all across. Wait, no.
I think we all have low power mode these days.
Okay,
you know what I mean?
I'm in. I'm in. I'm plugged in. And so for this, it was really getting to have a piece of music that I was actually choreographed to. And and I knew, you know, part of it is like getting the right cast together, you know, this amazing group together, like knowing that their physicality is going to also play hand in hand with the puppetry, that it's not just the puppets that are on stage. She also really wanted to highlight the music. She didn't want the musicians to be in the pit. She wanted it to be like, celebrate the music. Let's celebrate the live musicians. Let's celebrate the puppets. Let's celebrate these performers, and like just have a big party on stage. And so that's sort of like what we did. And, you know, it took a lot of, there were moments that I was like, oh my God, is it okay that it's just this little swan on stage? And like, it seemed so big, but like in like a giant, you know, a fairly large proscenium, it's like this little dot. But then it's like, that's kind of the beauty of, you know, going back to dance, that's that sort of beauty of that kind of a moment of it being, you know, a solo, even though it's 6 puppeteers together creating an image, it's a solo. Where of this, you know, the swan crossing the stage.
Yeah, we have a question.
Oh yeah.
Jess Simon wants to know: did you know in advance which objects would make up each animal, or did you just play with a pile of stuff?
Great question, Jess. It was kind of it was sort of both things happened. I had because it was a commission, I had to do drawings. I couldn't just be like, I'm going into my own rehearsals with my visions and everyone's going to trust me. I had to like show up, you know, like here, hey Miller Theater, this is what I'm making. And they were like, oh yes, we like it. But there was kind of only with like about 5 of them. And so I just started to have fun. It was an exciting project to like think about, like, what are the things that could become things. And there were things that felt very obvious to me, like the dusters that become the rooster and the chickens. Yeah. That was obvious to me that I should use that. The other one that felt obvious was using the broom for the mule, for the jackass. And then other things, it was just like really fun to kind of like figure out, like, well, what could this be? What could this be? I just really enjoyed going through that process of figuring that out. And also like even thinking about going back to the elf, using the buckets. Like I felt like, is that okay? Am I allowed to use like big, funny, loud buckets on stage with an orchestra?
Right.
And you know, and that's, you know, we did.
Yeah, you can't see quite here in this photo, but Kirsten Kammermeyer there is holding some pieces of wood that are connected to the big buckets that are feet of the elephant.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful image. It really, I mean,
yeah. Well, they did
the kind of thing that's it's so great because, I mean, your worry of like, can we use buckets when there's a orchestra on stage because it'll be so noisy, but at the same time, like if there's an elephant on stage, you expect to hear the footsteps of it.
Yeah, totally.
You know?
And you just hope that the puppeteer can keep time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Which fortunately the two people that have done that are good at that.
Yeah. So now I want to talk a little bit about, because you have recently taken on a couple of positions of leadership in puppetry. You've started teaching at Sarah Lawrence College. For how long have you done that now? For a couple of years now, right?
It's been a little while now. I've kind of lost track of time, but it's been at least for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you also now with Robin Frohart run the St. Anne's Warehouse Puppet Lab.
That's right.
Which is another great puppetry residency development program, which I can say is wonderful from personal experience. Really, it's like a long-term development program. So, you know, that involves both teaching at a collegiate level and also running a residency program. Really involves interacting with a lot of different artists' process, and, you know, sort of being a guide to a lot of different process styles. What have you learned about being that kind of a guide, or what have you learned about different people's process, especially because both of those places have people that are brand new to puppetry? Yeah.
Well, I would say that like one of the things that that I've, you know, really embraced along the way, and I think it partly is because of me learning more about who I am as an artist, of just really embracing the fact that there are so many different ways of making, and that everyone is like their way in is the right way, you know, and allowing that, because as artists, it's important for an artist's voice to be heard, no matter like what that way is, like whether they've gone to school for, you know, 10 years, or whether they have just sort of had like this, you know, moment of, I have this thought and I want to do it. And, you know, how do we, you know, move that forward? It's fascinating. I would say that like with the St. Anne's Lab, you know, it's more, you know, there, a lot of them, it's kind of like a 50-50 thing where there's people, I mean, it's not always a split, you know, a perfect split, but like there's people who have experience in creating puppet theater or even theater, and there are people that haven't before. And I just think that it's really beautiful to go into that kind of a situation that both sides are really valid, because we all can learn. I mean, all I want is to learn from the person who's coming to it from the beginning, because they have these incredible morsels of information that we all maybe have lost along the way. You know, like when I look back at some of the work that I made when I didn't know what I was doing, I'm like, oh my God, if only I could, you know, go back into that innocence and that sort of, you know, I mean, there's, you know, it's like, yeah, it could be improved, but still there's like these incredible kind of morsels there that are like, oh, you know, to be in that mode again, to feel that freedom. And so I think that there's something really incredible about that. But to also in that same realm, a person that's in that mode can also sort of lose confidence along the way, because of their feeling like it is supposed to be something that they don't know how to do. And so that's something else. And I, you know, something that I learned from a bunch of different people, but I'd say like the person who I've heard it the most is from Matt Atchison, who used to do the lab, who used to be the director with the lab. Was just like this kind of idea of like being okay with something being messy, you know, and like allowing that to be part of the process. The part of the process of I don't know is such an important part of the making process. And I think that sometimes it's hard to get past that I don't know mode, but when we do, you know, when we can and just accept it and be like, yeah, I don't know, you know. The other person who taught me that was Mr. Dan Herlin. And I don't know if you recall him saying this multiple times, but I just remember like going into those rehearsals, and of course that feeling where you're like, I've got to know what I'm doing. I've got to know what I'm doing. I've got to like look good. I've got to make sure that he's really feels good about hiring me, you know? And of course that like went out the window after a couple of rehearsals, and realizing, oh my goodness, he's this remarkable artist that still is approaching work. I mean, he's got this huge like backpack full of experience and material, but he's also not afraid to say, I don't know. And that was a big thing that I loved learning from him, was that to say, if for a cast of people looking up at you and they're like, what do you want us to do now? I don't know. You know, and that's okay to like say that. And it sort of like puts this like, you know, this bit of relief off. And that was big for me as an artist to learn that from him.
Yeah. It's a very different kind of process of making a piece, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that that's partly that idea, like when you're creating devised work, you know, where, I mean, even Dan, like he works with a script of sorts, you know, a storyboard kind of a thing. But still like being in that kind of that place of devising theater where you kind of have like various points that you want to hit, but you don't really necessarily know what the order is going to be and like how you're going to get to those points.
Yeah, I feel like there's a real distinction too there between I don't know, like not being prepared and saying I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like you can have both. You can really come into a room and be prepared, and you can like do your homework, and you can like come up with some ideas, or you can come, you know, have things to try, and then also not know whether it works or whether it fits in the piece, or whether you know why it's interesting or why it's not interesting or something like that. But that being able to sit with that feeling of not knowing is a real skill. It's, I mean, I you know, I studied with Dan when I was at Sarah Lawrence, and it has taken me at least 15 years of practicing that, if not more. Like it took me like 15 years to just like identify that was what I was working on. It's like the feeling of being okay with not knowing. And then, you know, that then till now, continuing to say, like continuing to like embrace that feeling of, you know, feeling like I don't have to, like it's connected to a sense of wonder, which I can really get behind.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to think about it, is that sense of wonder. And that kind of puts it into the positive too, because it's like, well, it could be, so many things could happen right now. And, you know, so, and then like, you know, and then in terms of like the Sarah Lawrence thing, you know, that's been an incredible thing for me. I've just loved it. And it's so much about who comes into the room. I mean, it's the same way when you cast something, but it's just, you know, the students, I've had like a couple of years ago where I just kind of felt like things were like slightly going flat in there. And it was just like, where's the energy? What's going on? And then like the next year, it's just like wham, but you know, everybody's just like puppets, 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 you know, and it just becomes this like incredible creation time. So it really, it's a tricky, the college thing is tricky. I mean, teaching is tricky, you know, no matter what age it is. And even though they're in college, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be like this like incredible focus and interest, and like they're like staring at you like, yes, I agree what you say. You know, that's not happening. There's a couple of those. But I've loved like, I just always wish there was more time, you know? I mean, it's, you know, you meet once a week for 2 hours, and I barely managed to do 4 styles of puppetry. You know, we focus on shadow puppetry, toy theater, bunraku style, and marionettes. And within all of that, you know, it takes so much time to build, you know, certain ones take, you know, so I used to have them build bunraku puppets. I learned my lesson, at least for now. I have to come up with a better plan of like, you know, because it takes a long time. And we're talking about people that have never, you know, a lot of people that have never used a saw in their life. You know, it's the first time to put a tool in their hand, and it's the first time, you know, and that's that kind of that assumption thing, you know, too, where it's like, well, here's a screwdriver. What? You don't know how to use a screwdriver? All right, here, let me show you. But I really love that. One of the things that I really enjoy about that too is the age range. You know, there's freshmen in that class, but then there's also second year grad students, and both do amazing things for each other. There's a lot of crossover and so much collaboration. But I've tried to like share. It's interesting because it's like doing the Sarah Lawrence thing. There is like a little bit of like an academic you know, like really for me, only a little bit of an academic thing. I mean, for a lot of people, it would be a lot, but I'm not really that person. But we do like the research projects things, and we learn about like a little bit of history, but it's mostly about just get your hands dirty and learn how to do it. I mean, I try to approach it the same way that I learned, which was dabbling, you know, making things of my own, but then also going and like just learning how to build something. I mean, I've learned how to build stuff with you, you know, going into your shop and not knowing how to work with a particular material. I mean, that's like this amazing way of it's just like touch the stuff, touch the materials, and, you know, put them together. Because I think that there's like, there's a balance, and everybody's different. Some people need so much instruction, and some people, you know, that if you give them a little too much instruction, they're going to copy you, and you don't want them to necessarily copy you. You know, I want this to be a creative endeavor, and I want them to be utilizing. It's not just about the making of like the building of something, the technical building of something, but it's also about dreaming and imagining and, you know, utilizing this thing. And so I'm asking them to do a lot. I've really tried to put it into the realm of making theater. And kind of upping. I mean, Dan did this too. You know, Dan used to teach the class, and I took it over from him, and I do my very best to have like even just a percentage of his ability to even as a teacher. He's such an amazing teacher. Yeah. But I try really hard to express that to them, that I'm trying to get them to be. The class is about devising work as well, and you're utilizing another medium to create theater. So that's.
Yeah, I always really felt like, because I studied with Dan my freshman and sophomore year at Sarah Lawrence, then went to the University of Connecticut to study in their puppetry program, and then came back to study with Dan my senior year. And I really felt like the UConn program is very much about like the history and tradition of puppetry, and it's about learning about puppetry. And the approach that Dan's class takes is learning how to make personal theater, like learning how to make new work that is personal to you with puppets. Yeah. And that, you know, you need to learn about the tools to make interesting theater. Right. But that's really the way in, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, very much.
And also, he came at it with that sense of like, I don't know about puppets, so everyone has to do research to like help teach everyone else who also doesn't know about puppets to like. I may not know about puppets, but I know like how to guide research and like how to guide finding out about something. Right. And I feel like that's a really, you know, great distinction to have as a teacher. Yeah. How do you learn about what your students or your residency participants, like, how do you learn about what their styles are or how their processes are like? I mean, especially with such limited time, you know, with the residency, you meet once a week for a couple months, right?
Right. Yeah. So for, we do, and we're still meeting. We're meeting over Zoom these days. Yeah. Oh boy. But yeah, it's about, it's very interesting because they're, you know, again, it's like, it's trying to give someone just enough that you feel that they need before you're telling them how to do something. You know, I feel like, I mean, you know, the school thing, you can get, you know, it's important to have a little bit of, here's how you do that thing. Right. You know, if you want to do that, here's how you do it. And I often will ask, I'm like, would you like my opinion about what you should do? Would you like me to tell you some ideas that I have? I try not to ever say, I've got an idea, you should do this. I try not to ever do that because I feel like that's just like, whoa, you know. But with the
well said.
I mean, come on. But with the lab, there is, you know, they are all my colleagues. I like to think about everyone as being you know, it's like this year in it, like Chris Green is in it, and Joseph Solofsky, and like these people that have been making theater forever and ever and ever. And, you know, they could just as well be leading this you know, the lab as much as me and, you know, and Robin. You know, I think we both feel really lucky to be doing it. And, I love doing it. It's totally exciting. It's thrilling and scary. there's, you know, I feel like there's kind of a lot. At times I feel like there's a lot at stake because I really want these people to, I want them to like me, and I want them to, and I want them to feel really good about being makers, and I want them to feel, I want them to like totally embrace their the quirkiness. I want them to embrace the mess, and I want them to. So I think that a really important thing is to help them to define what they want to get out of the process. That's like a really good conversation to have, where it's like, you're not saying this is what you're going to get out of this process, but to say, and I think that's important in that, so that they all do remain individual artists, and that allows everyone to continue to offer great feedback, feedback from all different voices. You know, I mean, as we get to know each other more and more in the lab, that we are able to fine tune our information more, because we get to know more about like where they are. And as people progress in their projects, you know that they need perhaps something different. And there's always that question of, you know, would you like to hear what I have to say? And if someone says no, well, okay, fine. That's okay.
That's fine.
We're not always ready to hear feedback.
I mean, yeah, you have to be ready to accept input for it to be any kind of useful, you know.
Yeah.
It really is like the door has to be opened by that person, you know,
Yes.
for things to get through.
Yes.
How do you, so the lab at the end of the process, the lab presents works in progress, or offers the opportunity to present works in process to the public.
Yes.
How do you feel like that? I always feel like that's a kind of trade with the process where you can be okay with the mess and be okay with not knowing, and the feeling that you have to show something to the public at the end. How do you manage that in the lab?
Well, it's been a conversation the last couple of years of, frankly, of trying to figure out how to make the showing slightly more informal. You know, I feel like each artist has the ability to be as formal in their share as they want to be. You know, you don't have to be performing at the amazing St. Anne's Lab. You can be performing in a very small place and still create a slick, you know, perfect feeling type of small show. Or you can create a totally a big, wonderful, what you're wishing your show to be. But at St. Anne's, it's hard because it's this big, gorgeous space. And so how do you go from it being this sort of like, hey, it's okay, let's just make something, it's all about the process. But there does become a point where it's not just about process, but it is about, you are going to be sharing this in front of a large audience. I mean, nowadays we're still trying to consider and figure out how do we share. We're still planning on doing the lab, presenting these lab pieces at some point whenever we're allowed to be have audiences again. We don't know what the story of that is at all. But it does actually offer an opportunity to reconceive what the look of that space is, and perhaps create smaller theaters within the space, and which would become something a little bit more intimate. Now, interestingly, or not so interestingly, depending on what where you're at with this, some people don't want it to be intimate. Some people want it to be, like it's so different. But what's cool about these new possibilities is that it allows an artist to have the intimacy if they feel that they need it, and also hopefully allow for an artist to have something a little more grand if that's part of their scheme and part of what they're envisioning. And I still feel like it's a tricky thing of figuring out how to convince an audience of all of that. An audience. We can promote our shows and we can say to our friends, I'm presenting a work in progress, and we kind of know what a work in progress means. But you see something in a slick brochure and you purchase a ticket and you don't know, and you even the word work in progress, you're still like, but I bought a ticket, and why isn't, I'm expecting something more grand. So it's a tricky thing, and that's kind of like, there's not a whole lot to be done about that. The mindset of an audience member is like, good luck. Good luck knowing what what, where this person just came from, where they're going, who did they just encounter on the street, what phone call did they just have. So yeah, I mean, it's my wish and hope that an artist will continue to be fulfilled through that entire process, even, from like the little beginning process of creating and figuring out what the show is to, part of the process is having an audience in front of it. And sometimes even feeling uncomfortable about that is a good thing to feel, or I don't know if the word good is the right thing, but I'll just say that it's a part
Valuable.
of the process. It's valuable.
It can certainly be valuable.
Yeah.
And certainly like knowing if things are working to people that are seeing it for the first time and are not seeing it and not planning on
not
seeing it again.
Click. Yeah.
Like that, work often needs to be able to, happen in the moment. You need to be able to connect in a moment.
Yeah.
Where
I think about
especially
that a lot
if you're,
my work.
Yeah.
And just sort of like, because it's like we can all perform for our friends until the cows come home. And everybody gives you, they're like, oh, I love you. Oh, you're so funny. I love your work, blah, blah, blah. But like, what is somebody that doesn't know you? Like, how are they feeling? What did they feel?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think I'm so glad that you are, in these positions of leadership in the community, because I think
Thanks.
Your work and your approach to work is just great, and the way that you encourage other people to find their voice is really, it's a hard thing to do, and I think you do it really well.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm really interested in trying to, I think we, in the puppetry community, it's exciting to think about pushing the boundaries of puppetry, and that's something that I try to do in my own work. And I'm not because I want to be different, but just because that's exciting to me. And I think it's the lab is an opportunity to do that too, because especially with people that haven't approached puppetry before, they're like coming into it and it's like the question of like, is this a puppet? Well, sure, that's a puppet, No, it doesn't have eyes. No, it doesn't have, but yep, there you go. Depends on how you use it. What's the relationship with it on stage, and what's, so that's exciting.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Yeah, there was a question that came in. Are you and Robin the ones who select the new works, and what excites you when you consider proposals for the new puppet pieces?
Oh, that's a good question.
That's a very good question. We are, the two of us are, there is some voices. There's some voices from St. Anne's that chime in from that process, which is really great. It's wonderful to have a third voice within that, because it's intense to be like looking through a bunch of proposals, and it's they're proposals and they've got like a couple of pictures and like a couple of like little video clips of past work, and it's hard to go through that, but it often comes down to not only, it's not just like I like that. It's kind of like putting usually it's a group of 8 pieces, and it's about figuring out what those 8, like a house, like what are those 8 pieces together? How do are there anything that's too similar? But that's even like, I feel like I'm going to say all this stuff and then like next year everything I say it's going to be thrown out the window. It's like I was going to say if there's like a bunch of shadow puppetry pieces, or we're going to choose one shadow puppetry piece, but that's not true.
Yeah. Do you think about the people? Do you think about how the people represent themselves and like build an ensemble of people who will feed off of each other, or are you really looking at the work itself as a standalone?
No, it's so many things at once. It's like looking at the work. That's like the first thing is like, oh, does the project excite? What is this piece? And then it's also like, oh, it's the person's a poet. They've never made a puppet show together before. Oh my God, that person has to be a part of this. I think that I know that now more than ever in this amazing time that and is so challenging, but it's also an amazing so many possibilities, and like we're all trying to do our part to like open the door. But it's like the last lab we had one African American person apply to the lab, and it's something that is you know, something's gotta, you know, drum, we gotta
ready
drum
for
that up,
change.
you know?
Well,
Yeah.
right. I mean, the lab is a place where people can come into the puppetry community and can, you know, it can be an agent for change in the community as a whole.
Absolutely. And I just, you know, as so many people are feeling right now, it's so important for, like, you know, everybody to be seen, you know, and to be represented. And, you know, I'm, you know, obviously all for that, but it's a very strange, you know, I feel like a lot of, within the, you know, puppetry world, that's been challenging, and it's, you know, trying to really make sure that, you know, in a super positive way, that there's, you know, that there's more being paid to attention paid to diversity within the puppetry community. So yeah. I'm hoping, and I'm sure that this next time around that we do the that we have the application, we open the applications, and again, I have no idea what the timing of that will be. It'll all be based on when we end up doing, you know, presenting the group that's been waiting in the wings.
Right.
So that'll be a while before that application process opens up again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when it does, you know, we'll all be looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. It's been really great talking to you. I love talking to you. It's just a delight. I'm so glad that you could join us, and I'm so glad that you're doing so well and have some exciting things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you,
we'll
talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, bye. You guys. Bye. Bye.
Well, we have come down to the end of this week's show. I want to thank you all for joining me, and for all of you that stuck around this whole time. It's been great. I want to just remind you that we are now posting archive episodes of Puppet Time Online on the Puppet Kitchen YouTube channel. And it's a slow process of turning that channel into something active and alive and something really exciting. But you can check out old episodes, including this one, on our Puppet Kitchen YouTube channel. Today, my shout-outs, I want to definitely shout out the Broadway Advocacy Coalition, which led an excellent series of forums on called Broadway for Black Lives Matter. And you can check out more information about them at broadwayadvocacycoalition.org. I also want to shout out that Puppet Playlist number 30, of which Katie and I have a piece, has been rescheduled for an upcoming date, July 1st. That's Wednesday at 8 p.m. You can find out more information about that at sinkingshipproductions.com. And just a quick shout out to Windflower Farms, where we have signed up for our CSA, and just it's really important to support local agriculture and local businesses. So with that, I want to remind you that you don't have to do everything to do something, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.